Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pop Culture SquadCast Live. This is our second episode this week. Hi Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Bob?
I'm doing good. This is the second episode of the week. We have a great guest coming up. Eric Palicki is going to be here. I've been wanting to get him on the show for a few years now since we started. So I'm looking forward to that. And it's a Thursday. It's a long weekend coming up for those of us still employed on a regular basis.
Oh God, I don't know if I've ever been employed on a regular basis.
Listen,
I spent 7 years at DC the second time around. I guess that's regular.
That's regular. You had to go to the office. You had an office.
Yeah, you're right.
You had to take the train in every day.
Yeah, I like the train part. I like the train part because I wound up at Grand Central Terminal, which is my favorite spot in all of New York City. It is a wonderful building.
It is. It is. So I want to follow up on a couple of things that we kind of talked about, and we've kind of talked about them. We talked about Archie earlier this week on the other show, and the decision has come out, and I've read it. Mike hasn't read it, and I do want to say that I approve. I think it's entertaining. I think it is an Archie book, and at the same time, you can gain those little Tom King things off of it. It's good.
I have no doubt, given the pedigree, including the characters, it really should be.
Right.
I'm looking forward to it. My friendly neighborhood retailer evidently doesn't stock it.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit before we get to our guest about trade shows in our industry. You famously have, a lot of history with that, but I want to talk about some things that are kind of going on in the news today or in the past couple of weeks and in the future. I want to hit a couple of the shows that are going on or went on. And first, I want to talk about what went on. And this was I think it was last weekend or the weekend before. And it was Anime NYC. And I'm just so excited that this show was as big as it was. They were the first American Anime Awards, I think, or manga awards. There was some award thing that went on there that we had a bunch of friends who were there, who and a bunch of American, creators were there at this show, and I think that's fantastic. It's an avenue to expand visual storytelling.
I had a mild surprise a couple of days ago with respect to manga.
Yes.
We, meaning young Adrian and I, went to a Barnes & Noble's that was actually close to us that opened up a little while ago. Never been to that one. They closed down two much, much bigger ones in order to build this tiny one. But that's good because the bigger one is, nobody's buying CDs and DVDs and shit. So, okay. And so I'm walking around the place. It's really pretty. And, I'm looking at the graphic novels section. It's not as large as I would have hoped. And I'd seen pretty much everything in it. But the manga section was still like 4 times larger. And if that's the proportion, the sales proportion, manga outsells graphic novels 4-1 or 3-1 or whatever, or 10-1 because they're smaller. I'm glad. Don't get me wrong. I'm very, very glad. But I was a little surprised to see that proportion be so broad.
There's a lot of them. Number one.
Yes, there is. We got a lot of graphic novels too, though.
Yep. I'd love to get somebody on to talk about that. Because I've had conversations with some people who were on the industry side, the publishing side of how they go about stocking bookstores in terms of graphic novels.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. This is we got a little weird thing. Let's go back. This is our normal look.
Yes.
But it was weird.
You confused me.
I did. We went big. We were trying to get in your face. This is.
Yeah, I was thinking I should have shaved.
We may try it again. Don't worry, we'll get there. So yeah. There's a big thing because of the returnability differences and the way things work out. So yeah, I would like for. I don't know that Barnes and Nobles is the place. I don't know where the place is for comic book graphic novels to be had. I'll tell you this much.
There's a place, but very few people live near a comic book store.
Sure. My issue is this. There are plenty of graphic novels that are coming out that I know for a fact that comic book shops are not hosting. Things like almost every week or at least 3-4 times a month, Fantagraphics has a brand new original creator owned, cartoonist designed graphic novel that is good. It's they're not going to they're going to waste their printing money. But I don't know, if you don't know it's coming, you're not going to order it. I don't know where they're shipping them to.
Yes. Magazine and book distribution has always been very mysterious because it's so slap hazardous, they just toss it out and hope for the best. It's gotten a little bit more precise now, and it gets a little scary towards the end of the year because some states have a tax on everything unsold that's on the floor of the store.
Well, that's terrible.
Graphic novels in those states tend to get returned to the printer, to the publisher, right around December 30th. If it doesn't sell for Christmas, it's out of there, and they don't get enough copies. Comic books, we're used to seeing comic books in quantity. We don't see that much anymore. Graphic novels hardly ever, perhaps at a comic book store.
Sure. I want to talk. So there's a couple of shows that are going on this weekend, and they're both kind of very different shows. And it's the point that I'm trying to make here is that I spend a lot of time going to comic book shows, comic book conventions, whether they're strictly comic shows or if they're more of a pop culture show. This weekend, Dragon Con is happening in Atlanta. I've not been there. It is on my bucket list of shows that I need to go to. And I know this is a different kind of show. Yes. There is a comic avenue. I don't know. They're called tracks, I think. There's there's a comic track, there's a anime track, there's a animation track, there's all kinds of stuff. So that's going on this weekend. I've already seen videos of large crowds of people. Hopefully everybody stays healthy and has a great time. And
you mean they're in line right now? It opens tomorrow and they're in line today?
Oh, I saw people partying yesterday about it.
Oh, geez. Well, you got to party if you're gonna.
Well, sure. I mean, there was some hotel bar or a hotel lobby that was just filled with people counting down to the start. So yeah. So
hotels like comic book conventions much more today than they did when they started back in Phil Sewell's day, because back in those days, we had smaller crowds and less alcohol consumption. It was
We've
not
changed that.
Yeah, it was not unusual to be at a party amongst comics people where there was hardly any alcohol being served, which greatly annoyed people like Howard Chaykin, who just expected it, and that's fine. I get that. I don't drink alcohol, so I don't notice it. But I have noticed the slow trend to the bar.
Yeah, well, I don't know. That may be changing too. So maybe going back the other way. We'll see how that goes. There's another con going on this weekend. PAX West in Seattle is a gaming and animation show, and I think that's fantastic. I want those types of people to be able to people who enjoy that type of content to be able to see their content, to be able to go to shows. I it's just a thing about where we want all of our nerddoms to be able to be satisfied, and getting in place where there are other people who share that nerddom is fantastic.
Absolutely. Every gaggle of humanity that shares an interest in others, in the other cultures, the non-mainstream cultures, which are all so big that they might as well be thought of as mainstream. The fans deserve those opportunities to see the new stuff, to meet their friends, to make new friends, to meet the people who've created it. I've always enjoyed the convention experience, but I have to admit, having done so many comic book conventions, given what I do for a living, when I'd go to a place like the Science Fiction World Con or something,
right,
I really enjoy it because I'm not working as hard, and it's like I get to see everybody else's fan experience, and it's really kind of fun.
Well, when you helped to found or get Chicago Comic Con off the ground, and it continued for so long, like what was your, you were almost in comics, not really, but at that point.
Yeah, I think that's kind of true. I mean, I had experience in the underground comics. I had experience in media. Certainly, I've been on radio for 1,000 years and writing my balls off and all this other stuff. And I'd actually been advising a couple of comic book store owners in terms of dealing with the direct sales system, which was just starting up because of the direct sales stores, because of comic book stores. So I was, but I wasn't, and that was fun. However, by the time our first show started, which was August of 1976 at the Playboy Hotel in Chicago, Illinois, I was in the comics business.
Right. You got that thing, but when you guys were doing it, when you said let Chicago have a big show, and then you continued with that, like what was the impetus for that? Like why did you need to do that? Because it was comics, so it wasn't because of money. Like
no. It wasn't my idea. I was invited. A bunch of retailers, Joe Sarno and Ross Knight and Larry Sherritt, started it. Ross left after the first show, and Bob Weinberg came in, and then I left after the 10th show, which was 10 years, and I was moving back to New York. So Gary Calabuano took that role. But I was there because I knew thousands and thousands of people in the comics business even before I was in it. And therefore, it was just sort of a natural for me to do the programming, the panels and all that stuff, which is what I did. And also we put together the program book for those first 10 years because, publishing. I had a great time, but I'll tell you a story. On the 11th show, the first show I wasn't involved in, but I was there, of course. Mm-hmm. On the last day of the show, we were at the Ramada O'Hare Hotel, as I recall. and we were just outside the big ballroom where the dealer's room was. And a friend comes up to me and says, "Well, what's it like just being here and not being, running parts of the show?" And I just sat back and I smiled. And just as I smiled, the fire alarm went off. And everybody had to leave. And by the way, a fire alarm going off at a comic book convention is scary shit because it's all paper.
Yeah.
And
I've heard of this story.
Yeah. And I just had this big smile on my face and I said, "Well, it's actually it's pretty good. Let's go."
That's good. That's good. Like I said, it's a fun thing. I spend a lot of time doing it. I find it to be enjoyable. I hope our fans and our watchers and squad members, take advantage of whatever's in their town. I want to give, do a little bit of a call out to what's coming, in case we don't see you guys before then. But Baltimore Comic-Con is coming up in a couple of weeks. Mike is not going to make it this year, but I will be there. There will be a lot of really cool programming and panels that we've been working on. I'm very excited about it. I think I'm doing 9 or 10 panels, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And even if I'm not, there are still plenty of people that we have about 4 or 5 different panel hosts that are rotating around, and it's going to be a big show. They're just announcing celebrity guests, and one of the things about Baltimore Comic-Con is that they don't have a whole bunch of celebrity guests. There's usually like 2 or 3 a year. It's the 25th anniversary of Baltimore Comic-Con. It is Flash themed because the celebrity guests are John Wesley Shipp and Sam Jones, so they're both Flashes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm making that connection. And John Glover, I think, is going to be there as well. So.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
All 3 are wonderful guests.
Yeah.
I had a long conversation with John on a couple of occasions. He did some stuff here in Connecticut at dramatic readings and things like that. And he's just a fascinating, wonderful guy. And if all you know of him is like Lex Luthor, you're in for a surprise. Lex Luthor's, yeah. So that's cool. I regret not being at the show. I'm almost always there. I think I even showed up next year for COVID, but I regret it. But I got to be in Chicago a couple of days earlier.
Yep, we're gonna get you back next year. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to touch before we get to our guest? Well, we can hold off to that. Our guest is here. He's in the green room. I want to bring him in. He's really, really wonderful human being, and I'm excited to have him on the show. So everybody, please enjoy. We're going to bring in Eric Palicki.
So can anyone hear me, or did StreamYard do?
Yep, we can hear you. StreamYard mutes you when the music's playing or when the movie's playing.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. Welcome.
I see that you can't see me.
I can see you.
You can see me.
We can see you. We can see you. Are you on we can see you. We can hear you. You look great.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Bob. If everyone can hear and see me, for whatever reason, StreamYard seems to be a kryptonite for me. I end up usually using my phone because...
Are you on your phone now?
No, I'm actually on my MacBook. So
okay, well, it's working good. It's working good.
Then I'm not gonna touch anything. I'm just gonna sit here and not even gonna breathe.
Can you see the screen at all?
I can see the screen. I can see the two of you. I just have a black box where I'm supposed to be.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. I love
so
that.
That's perfect. That's
it's one of those things you rub the black thing off with a quarter. You just right on the screen.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that. It's expensive equipment. I'm really glad you're on the show. We've you and I have talked about this for quite some time.
Yeah, it's been one of those things. I've really wanted to do it. It's one of those, I always feel weird to just come on and just talk about a body of work rather than having anything that's new or imminent coming out or happening in the comics sphere.
Sure,
but it's still great to come and talk.
Well,
you're more interesting that way, because I think most people are, because you have something to plug and you don't want to forget it, so you're focused on it the whole time. Here we can just get into conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If I haven't done this, Mike, and Eric, welcome to meet each other if you haven't done that.
Oh, lovely to meet you. And I've watched the show when I can. It sometimes falls at a very awkward time for me. I'm in the car on my commute home most Tuesdays, but I tune in when I can. But it's nice to meet you, virtually at least.
It's great to meet you. You're in a wonderful city, and oddly enough, I haven't been there for a few years, and I miss it. It's great.
So, well, let's talk about that. Why did you move out there? Because you were not originally from Seattle, right?
No, I'm a Midwest transplant, born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. And after a brief stint in Columbus, I came out to Seattle. I followed my girlfriend took a job out here. I followed her out. It's been a phenomenal experience since. I love the city, love what I do. The weather is perfect. It's not too hot, not too cold. Those Midwest winters and summers, I can never have to deal with those again, which is fantastic. The creative community is, maybe I should have settled a couple of hours south in Portland where all the comic folks are, but the creative community out here is still pretty great.
Yeah, you need to update.
I'm sorry. I'll be driving through Toledo in about 10 days, 12 days. And that's Toledo's the spot on my drive. I'm driving from Connecticut to Illinois. And so that's usually the spot where I start to be really concerned about where the wind is coming from off the Great Lakes. Which,
sure,
as I often point out, is what used to be referred to as the interocean, because that's how much water is there. But the way it's positioned, if you're on the sort of southeast end of any of the Great Lakes, you can disappear for months.
So, first of all, you need to check. It's either Amazon or Goodreads or both of them, because they still have you living in Ohio. In terms of your bios.
Well, I will fix that.
But besides that, I want to get into, like we talked, that the intro has all of your all the work you've done over the last 15 years or so. And why comics? Like, it's a question I ask often, and I find it to be always an interesting answer, because it's never always the same. But why? There's a grain that follows through everybody's answer. But what for you? Why do you want to be in comics?
Well, it's because I really didn't want to be rich.
That's a good one. That's a common theme. Sure.
Yes.
Start with that. Yeah.
So I've always been infatuated with storytelling. I have done it without really knowing what I was doing since I was a kid, and I was playing with my G.I. Joes and my Transformers in the backyard with my childhood friends, creating these scenarios and these stories and adding things to these characters. So I always kind of knew I wanted to be a storyteller in some capacity or other. I think for a long time, I thought I was going to be a prose writer, whether it would be novels or short stories. I had my Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison obsession in my early 20s and thought that maybe short stories were the way to go. And what that really has taught me is that I don't have the patience for prose. The beauty of comics is that there's an immediacy to it. I can write a script today, find an artist to work with, and a month later we can have a story. We can have some piece of material that's out there in the world, that doesn't happen that quickly in any other medium. Is comics is comics the only thing I'll ever do? I don't know. But right now it's really where my passion is. I love, I also had a dalliance with engineering. I thought I was going to be an engineer briefly. So I think something that's really cool about comics is that there is a similarity between comics and machinery, in that there are pieces that fit together seemingly inert on their own, but they work in concert to do something that none of those pieces can do by themselves. I just thought of that too, so I'm going to write that down.
You need to write that down. You can record this. Okay, let's record it. It's on the internet now forever, so you can bring that back. That is really good.
Comics is a wonderful experience because you can't tell stories you can't tell a comic book story any other way. And if people who are pissed off at like TV and movie adaptations or whatever because they're not like the comics, that's right. That's why comics are unique. And that's why the people who are involved in doing comics enjoy working in the medium. You can't tell a story like you do in other media. You go to other media and you tell a different type of story. You take your story, you mold it to the needs of that medium. And comics, there's something primal about the medium. You get together with your friends and you tell stories to strangers. And it's wonderful.
Sure. I mean, it's drawing cave paintings in Lascaux, right? It's maybe the oldest medium we have. That's what those are. Pictures arranged in sequence to tell a story. That's
right.
You say primal, it is really the oldest recorded form of storytelling that we have.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And I keep on wondering whether those original, caveman paintings, whether they started a whole storytelling trend. I mean, obviously, we don't know. We weren't there back then. But did storytelling start with a visual thought? Interesting.
It's interesting because there's another thing about comics that is uniquely suited to what you write. And I don't know that this is intentional. I want to get into why. But Mike's appellation tonight is a little ironic in that he called himself Monster Man Mike, and you have a thing with monsters. There's monsters and magic, magical creatures. Well, not that, but your stuff tends to be that thing. It's also easier. I mean, financially easier to render visual stories in comics where you're making up created characters like that. But why do you think you're drawn to that type of storytelling?
I think it is,
and we can get into all of them individually because I would like to, but just in general.
So I'm a lover of music, and one of my favorite songs of all time is Jimi Hendrix's cover of All Along the Watchtower, where he takes a already fantastic Bob Dylan song and he makes it his own, and he gives you something new. And I think it's something that I think other writers do as well, but it's kind of taking the stories that exist, the myths and legends that we have had for thousands of years, hundreds of years, and trying to use the conventions of those stories, the pieces and the parts of those stories, to make them appropriate and applicable to what is happening in the modern world. And you see this, I'm hardly the only person to do this. You know, I've heard people liken Alan Moore to a really good inker, and that he is also someone who takes, that Lovecraftian tradition of 100 years ago and applies it to the world of today. And I think that there's something fascinating about that. It's taking the stories that exist, those archetypes, apart, seeing how they work, and putting them back together in a way that's useful for 2024.
Making it contemporary is a trick, because it's a hard thing to do, because you're a fan of the stuff that is not contemporary.
Yes.
So you really have to know how to throw out the stuff that doesn't work, no matter how closely attached you are to it. And that's tough. That's really tough.
I mean, I want to, kind of agree with that. And I'm a fan of how you've done it, particularly with Atlantis Wasn't Built for Tourists and Blacksmith. These are very contemporary stories, very stories that are of the time in which they were written, but use, these ancient legendary creatures, and you do it really well. I mean, how much effort does that require from you? Because I don't want to diminish the work involved in comics. It's very important to people understand that it is work.
Yeah, it's absolutely work. And, in both of those instances, both Blacksmith and Atlantis Wasn't Built for Tourists, I just want to take a moment to call out Wendell Cavalcanti, who was my collaborator on both of those books. And those books, I don't think are anywhere near as good as they could have been, or nearly as good as they would have been with anyone else. I am saying this exactly the opposite of how I mean it. Those books are brilliant because I was partnered with a fantastic artist.
Sure.
And
fair. And true.
And Wendell is someone who I have worked with for a while, when we were both just making small web comics that I was posting on MySpace for 8 people to look at. And I hope that he and I can have a relationship, and a professional working relationship, like Ed and Sean do, and that we will just be making comics up until we're both 80. Here's hoping.
Yeah, absolutely.
But having that out of the way, there's definitely there's a certain level of originality that I take in both of those books, that I have taken those sort of I take a lot of pride in those books, because they do have pieces that started they start with something that existed, but I do think that we did a great job of turning them into something new and unique and original. And that's where the challenge lies, is because no one wants to read another werewolf story, another vampire story, unless you can say something new and interesting with it.
And that gets harder and harder all the time, because vampires and certainly zombies and werewolves are extraordinarily popular and are regularly popular. So they're kind of crowding out your story space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, with things like The Interview with a Vampire Show that is currently on cable, or the Twilight stuff, we are seeing more and more different takes on vampires. And part of what I really wanted to do with Atlantis Wasn't Built for Tourists was make vampires villains again.
Sure.
But also,
and you did.
Right, that is a book that is, a ostensible sequel to Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth, but also I stapled that mythology onto the plot of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or A Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of, this is again, where it feels a little bit like me trying to make a cover song, but make it my own.
Right. Well, you referenced Jimi Hendrix's cover of Dylan, and it did become a signature tune for him. But what has made Dylan for all of these years is the fact that not only does he do interesting stuff and is an interesting person, but other people can pick up that stuff and do interesting things with it, which is part of the whole fabric of music. And it's also part of the fabric of comics. Lots of people have done Superman. Lots of people have done Spider-Man. And I'm just talking about today. You go all the way back, and you have that catalytic role that you don't realize sometimes when you get into it, but later on, you got to be able to accept that and enjoy it and benefit from it.
Yeah, there's a whole tapestry of, when it comes to the big two and the characters that are sort of this part of this big corporate tapestry. These characters exist across 80 years, but the thing that you're reading only exists in a moment of time.
That's right.
And I remember being bothered by the machine guns on the Batmobile when I saw Batman 89 in the theater, because Batman doesn't use guns. But that is really across the entire history of Batman. Bob Kane had him carrying a gun, at least briefly in the early goings, because Batman exists across 80 years or longer. There are these things that exist in his mythology that we kind of have to, that we kind of by mutual decree and fiat have decided don't really count. But you have the Grant Morrisons of the world that say yes, no, everything counts.
Right. Well, Superman spent the first year or two of his existence just throwing bad guys off the roofs of tall buildings.
Sure.
They were fine. They landed just safely.
Right.
Maybe. Maybe.
We didn't see anything. Nobody saw them die.
That's right. Where's the body?
Listen, I mean, if you can all of a sudden decide that, the Stepford Cuckoos are now telekinetics, you can do whatever you want.
But we can.
I'm not. That wasn't. I was throwing a little shade, but I'm sorry.
Yeah. If we commit a horrible continuity error, somebody will fix it later on, and somebody else will be paid to fix it again. The first fix will work, the second will not.
Well, we all know that the Stan Lee would famously send no prizes to the fans that would fix it for him.
That's right. That was a good stunt because he generated a lot of mail for that.
I love the fact that we can get into things. There's a great little piece of fun fact. You know why the Hulk's real name is what it is, right?
It's Robert Bruce Banner.
That it's Robert Bruce Banner.
Because
he called him Bob.
Is that why?
Yeah, because at one point there's an issue where he calls him, where the lettering said it called him Bob instead of Bruce, and he's like, "Oh, his real name is Robert Bruce Banner,"
which they picked up TV show.
Well, then the TV show. different.
Yeah, I thought it had to do with the TV show and the studio thinking that Bruce was too effeminate of a name for a lead character.
I think that was because of Batman. That the TV show, that the TV studio said Bruce is already Batman.
There's already a Bruce. That makes sense.
I am perfectly willing to believe that the powers that be at both the studio and the network thought you can't have a big monster have a gay name. He's a big monster. And
Bruce was a gay name.
They're the big monsters, but okay.
Was that a name that was up? Because it's not today.
No.
I mean,
well, it depends where you are. Monty Python has a famous routine about all these philosophy professors in Australia named Bruce, because everybody in Australia is named Bruce. Well, that's a different thing than Bruce Wayne and Bruce.
I mean, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. I know. I think, yeah, it had nothing to do with the TV show. It had to do with the fact that in like third issue or something like that, maybe it was an Avengers issue, he was labeled, they called him Bob instead of Bruce. And so therefore they retconned it so that his name is actually Robert Bruce Banner.
Which looks great on a tombstone.
Sure.
Fascinating. And I mean, it's the 30 days from concept to print that means that there are going to be things like that happen. And rather than own up to a printing error or a typo that an editor missed, I love it. I love that they went so heavy into the retcon. That's fantastic.
Actually, that story proves a lot of things that bothered me about comics that have changed. Marvel had a very, very small staff at that time, so there were a few people who would see that mistake by chance. Stan was the editor as well as the writer, and as we all know, except for 2 or 3 people I could name but won't, you really should not edit your own stuff. You need other eyes on it.
Sure.
Bob edits me on at Pop Culture Squad. I've been editing since well before Bob was born. Doesn't matter. I demanded an editor. And Stan put the lie to the myth that you can edit your own stuff, because he's human. He was human.
It's interesting though. I mean, if you look through comics, there's not many people that were editing their own stuff at the big two through the 70s and 80s other than Stan. Marv also edited himself a lot at DC. Len too, yeah.
Roy, Jerry,
sure.
All of the editors in chief edited their own stuff over at Marvel in those days.
Fair.
Jack Kirby.
Jim
Sugar. Absolutely. Every one of them, just about.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That's true. That doesn't mean they should have, though. Not all of them should have.
Absolutely.
It was interesting. We go down these rabbit holes, and we have this great tapestry of history. Part of, Mike and I were talking the other day with Jerry Ordway, and we were talking about this book that just came out, which I read, and there's an interesting. It's about Zero Hour, and if you haven't read Zero Hour, it's like the 4th crisis. I don't know, something like, we had Crisis on Infinite Earth, and then we had a crisis every year, and I think it was like 3rd or 4th one. And there's a thing in there where the Fatal Five are in there, and Validus is in there, and I went down this little rabbit hole. I'm like, who created Validus, and did they think that I wonder what they would have thought about when Paul retconned it so that Darkseid took Garridan and made him Validus, who is the Mike. You stopped reading Legion of Superheroes at this point, but anyway, but like, so Shooter created Fatal Five. He created Validus, and And then, so I don't know. I'd love to know what Paul thought when he did that.
You know, Stan and Jack, Jack and Steve Ditko, both were quietly, while they were at Marvel, but quietly resented whenever anybody else was allowed to do what they wanted with their characters. It was one of the reasons why Jack left to go to DC, and Steve has always been very, very verbal about that. That's why he would never touch Spider-Man or Doctor Strange. But the fact of the matter is that popular culture is an evolutionary experience.
Sure.
The characters that you've seen on a long-running television show have changed and grown or shrunk over the course of that long-running television show, and they should. Otherwise, you'd be bored to tears. And that's part of life. We do hopefully grow, and it should be reflected in all media. That's how people work.
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
No, good. You jump in.
No, I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned that, Mike, because my one experience with the big two was I got to write a Guardians of the Galaxy 15-page story. It's, a fantastic opportunity that happened because I met some people at San Diego who passed my work on to Nick Lowe, who was then editing Guardians. And one of the coolest parts about that was I got to write Kitty Pryde, who is my all-time favorite Marvel character. But at the time, she was part of the Guardians of the Galaxy through some machinations that Bendis had, put together while he was writing the main Guardians of the Galaxy story. But the notion that a Guardians assignment would allow me to write my favorite character, who was an X-Men character, is exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, right? It's just kind of that,
Sure.
the evolution of the stories across 80 years, and what do we do that's new with this character, and thank goodness that happened, because
Absolutely.
Otherwise I would have been stuck writing Star-Lord, who is,
well, he was dating her,
right? Exactly.
Which is weird.
So getting to write her was, one of the coolest experiences that I've had as a comic writer, and only happened because of the kind of thing that Mike's talking about, where we're just trying to figure out what new thing we can do with these characters across 80 years or whatever of existence.
It's not hard if you fantasize that those characters are real human beings. Then you put yourself in the mind of a real human being. What would a real human being do 10 years later, 5 years later? How would they evolve? And of course, everybody could have their own approach to that, but your approach is the one they're going to publish.
Sure. And I mean, we do have this problem with comics, is that every writer has to put the toys back in the toy box the way they found them when they're done. So we get, what did Stan call it? It's not change, but the illusion of change.
Right.
So that
I want to argue that point a little bit, and I agree with. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, but I'm working on something right now where I'm kind of taking a look at Tom Taylor's Nightwing, which is about to end, right? So he's been on it since like 70 like 50 issues almost, just about. And
really,
and it was like 77 and it's 120, I think, or he's ending at. And he's altered the character, not tremendously. I mean, certain people have gotten, the people immediately before him had a lot more difficulties because they had been physically altered by people shooting him in the head. But a good storyteller, I think, in the comics will subtly move the character forward, give them You know, some of the things he did was, you know, he presented obstacles, but like, you know, staying true to the character, but like giving him things like he's got a little more family, like he's got more characters in his realm. He's got a new villain that, you know, I don't know if it's going to be gone or not, but like that villain is a really good villain that he wrote. He's got a dog now, which, you know, has its own book. You know,
if anything happens to Bitewing, we riot.
So, exactly.
Oh yeah. Although I am waiting for crossover with Doctor Strange. I want their dogs.
That exactly. Yeah. Perfect. You know, pizza dog. You know, you give somebody a dog, they're
there you go.
Yes. No, I think you're right. There are ways to do subtle shifts, and it's not 100%. It's impossible to completely.
What really moves it and makes it memorable.
Right. You know, what happens when Alfred inevitably comes back? Does that change what Tom has done with Nightwing? I hope not, because I really love what that particular wrinkle has done for the character. I think that's been a phenomenal, you know, I love that he has largely repaired his relationship with, and, you know, this can be the Tom Taylor appreciation hour. I don't care.
Sure. I'm fine with that.
You know,
yeah, really.
You know, his relation, they've largely repaired his relationship with Barbara. I think that's been fantastic. I think there are so many ways in which you can subtly move a character forward, but and you see that, you know, like we talked about, you know, once upon a time, Superman didn't fly, but did throw slumlords out the window. Once upon a time, Batman carried a gun. You know, and we subtly see the shift to remove those things, and those things kind of become what we think of as canon, even though if we take the Grant Morrison approach that everything matters, you know, we do see the subtle shift. So I do agree with you, Bob, even though there is, at least in broad strokes, this idea that we have to at least get the status quo close to where
I agree. Again, I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying I think that I've stood where you're saying, where your original premise. I've stood there and I'm like, yep, that's how it goes. But I'm questioning that. I'm saying, you know what? If you're really good at it, you can put the two toys back into the box, but they're just a little different.
Yeah,
you know,
sure. Bucky is still running around in the Marvel universe.
Yeah,
that's a phenomenal example, right?
Perfect.
You know, on the other hand,
doing so for so long.
Well,
yeah.
There were plenty of Buckys. They just weren't that original Bucky.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's true. It annoyed me to no end when one of their very first black superheroes was named Bucky, but they figured that out pretty fast. They figured it out within a couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about your books particularly and specifically, because I want people to know about them. But before we get to that, I want to talk about some of the other work you've done in comics. You've done a bunch of anthologies, both writing and editing. And as in editing, putting together a group of people, how do you find that to be both rewarding and challenging?
It is incredibly rewarding in that I've gotten to work with such a diversity of voices. I've gotten to discover voices. I've gotten to put voices and creators forward that maybe might not have otherwise had a platform to display their work. And that's always rewarding to me. I also love, you know, I have made so many friends, you know, present company included, through conventions and meeting people at conventions, and being able to like find a way to showcase that work is incredible. one of the challenging things is that everybody's process and pace is different. So it is a little bit like herding cats when you know, I struggle enough to keep myself on track, and having to do that and multiply that by 20 writers and artists, as well as letterers and colorists, is definitely a challenge. It's definitely, you know, trying to hit a deadline on that is incredibly difficult. And thankfully, you know, I'm 5 for 5 on being able to put together, you know, books that have been well received. I think with 1 or 2 very rare exceptions, we've gotten everybody that was on the initial invite list managed to get their project and their story in on time and find it to print, which is fantastic. You know, of those 5 anthologies, we've gotten 3 Ringo nominations, which is incredible.
Well deserved. Well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a lot of work, and you know, it does, like, if I'm speaking frankly here, there is definitely a sense that like all that work to put forward all the other voices in the books does diminish mine a little, which is why I've kind of stepped back from the anthologies to kind of focus on the work that I like, that I'm writing, because I love the anthologies, but I think it's important for me to get my voice out there as well.
Right. Sure. I've always seen putting together those types of anthologies to be a fascinating creative challenge. It is X number of times the work, but that's okay. You know, if you're going to play it safe, you wouldn't get into comics in the first place. The end result is either like, oh, did they print that? Or, wow, that was great. Almost nothing in between.
Yeah, and anthologies have, they don't tend to do very well in the direct market, but they do very well on crowdfunding sites, because you kind of get the force multiplier of 20 creators or 40 creators each promoting the anthology to their audience, which is great from a, you know, from a social media impact perspective and a crowdfunding perspective, but does not necessarily translate to sales in a bookstore or in a comic book shop, which is unfortunate, because there are some beautiful stories that we've published that I think have gone kind of underappreciated and undersold, because they're part of an anthology that people tend to just shy away from in the direct market.
Some of Alan Moore's best work was done for 2000 AD as just, you know, science fiction or horror stories, not, you know, character stories. Dave Gibbons drew a lot of those. It was just beautiful stuff. And in those 5 kind of oversized pages, you'd be seeing a type of story that you didn't see in the longer formats. And it allows the creators who are up for the challenge to stretch some muscles. And that's always interesting, because in an anthology, you're not really weighed down by the baggage of continuity. I say it like that's a bad thing. It's not. Except for when you don't want to use that stuff because you got a better story to tell. Well, in an anthology, you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at my entire catalog of stories, the best thing I've ever written is a story called 2 Left Feet, which was published in one of the anthologies I edited. All We Ever Wanted. It was All We Ever Wanted from A Wave Blue World, with Eric Donovan and Gab Contreras on art and colors, respectively. It's an 8-page. Yes, it's an 8-page sci-fi story, and it's I think my favorite thing that I've ever written. And you know, it's one of those things where you have to create a scenario and a setup and deliver a worthy conclusion in 8 pages. It's you know, it's a fun exercise, and I think that when you are forced into that box, you end up figuring out a creative way out of it.
The reason why we canceled Wasteland at DC, I canceled Wasteland. It's pretty rare for an editor to cancel a book. But after 18 issues, it was clear that John Ostrander, you're a terrific writer and an old friend, was spending as much time writing those 8-9 page stories in Wasteland as he would a full, superhero book or, issue of Suicide Squad. And he was, starving to death writing the best work of his career.
Sure.
For our longtime listeners, that is a great story that you've heard before, but I love when people hear it for the first time. So yeah, I mean it's true. Like I said, one of the things I and the first time that you and I actually met was when Maybe Someday was coming out, and I interviewed you and Matt and Tyler, when that was coming out, and I love the concept of the anthologies and being able to work your way through it. But I understand also where you have bigger stories and more of your voice that wants to get out. And I want to talk a little bit about that if you can. I want to talk about this book first. The Atlantis Wasn't Built for Tourists. I remember when this first came out, I was like, let me check this out. And unfortunately, and I apologize for saying this, but the publisher is not somebody I trust, and you don't have to comment. It's
nope.
Purely me.
No, it is. This is if you'll excuse the corporate speak, that's something that you and I can talk about offline. Because
absolutely.
Things are happening there, and yes.
However, I couldn't wait for the next issues. I was able to get. I think I got all of these issues, which at that time, with the way that things were coming out from Scout, wasn't great. But can you talk to our listeners who haven't read Atlantis Wasn't Built for Tourists? Where did you get this inspiration? What's the story about, and what do people look for in it?
Yeah,
it's still available. You can get it.
Yeah, you can still buy this. I think it is technically sold out from the publisher, but it's around. You can buy it. You can buy it digitally. I am on social media at Eric Palicki. Send me a DM on any of the myriad platforms, and I'll figure out a way to get you copies. So Atlantis Wasn't Built for Tourists is the story of a drifter who wanders into a small town in rural Oregon where all is not as it seems. And he discovers that the town and its sheriff are in thrall to monsters living in the woods. And this drifter takes it upon himself in kind of a Western type fashion to clean up the city, but all is not as it seems. And things escalate from there. I always liken this to it's H.P. Lovecraft meets Sergio Leone, and in some ways, very literally. Lucas Lewis, who is the drifter character, is someone who I hope to revisit at some point. If you're a fan of the modern set movies with a Western sensibility, things like No Country for Old Men.
Yes. That you hit that exactly.
And monster movies, I think this is a great fit, and that's kind of the mashup that I was going for.
One of the things that I loved so much about this story was that I got where you were going. I got that there was a threat, that things weren't as they needed, and there's this drifter here, and then there was a twist related to the drifter that I wasn't expecting, and it raised the level. Just like, okay, I can't stop reading this now. And yeah, it's really good.
Well, I appreciate that.
And it was hidden. I didn't know that was coming. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like you set up this there's a town, things aren't as they seem. There's this drifter, he's you think of Sergio Leone or, Fistful of Dollars. There's this Clint Eastwood type, loner drifter guy. And, obviously he's gritty and then all of a sudden he is more than he seems.
Well, I mean, if you give people the same old stuff over and over again, and it's not a hamburger from McDonald's, eventually they're going to get tired of it. In my case, I got tired of McDonald's pretty early, but nonetheless, the problem with like horror stories that I grew up with that preceded me, the EC stories in particular, is that if you have like 7-8 pages, you're going to have one of those little O. Henry twist endings. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was great, unless you're reading 4 of them in one comic book, and then the next comic book you pick up has 4 more. Then the twist ending becomes redundant, no matter how twisty that twist ending is.
Right. It's the M. Night Shyamalan problem, right? Like you see The Sixth Sense, and it's brilliant. You see Unbreakable, and it's slightly less brilliant. And then by the time you get to the 3rd and 4th movies in his canon, you're like, okay, what is the twist? Not being surprised by the twist, but trying to figure out what the twist is. And it's a completely different experience.
I may have mentioned this before on the SquadCast, but Alfred Hitchcock, of course, was well known for doing cameos in his own movies. And towards the end meaning the last 10 years or so of his career, he started putting those cameos in the first scene or second scene very, very early on, so that the viewer wouldn't be sitting there waiting for Alfred Hitchcock to show up. They'd be following the story. And boy, that was a very impressive and profound lesson to learn for a writer. Sometimes you have to put that little magic trick up front.
I'm excited about the concept of coming back to this character, so I want to say that, and I don't want you to get too far ahead of anything, so we'll leave it there. I want to talk a little bit more about Blacksmith,
okay,
which is an Ahoy book, and we're huge fans of Ahoy here,
and it's got a great title.
Thank you. It has. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
It took me a while. It took me like Blacksmith. I love it though. No, but that's the kind of storytelling that you're doing without even trying. Like it's in the title, and I have to go through a journey to get there, and that's what makes it interesting, because you don't have to do that. Somebody can not do that, but when people do that, it improves it. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is this has the dubious distinction of being the least funny of Ahoy's output, but they really like it.
We've talked to them about it, so there's that too. Like, we've told them how much we love it, so
they really love it too. Getting positive feedback from Tom and Stuart, who are famously tough nuts to crack, is another highlight of my career in comics. Like, I have a little quote that Sarah Litt, the editor on the book, sent me from Stuart after the book wrapped up, and I don't have it right in front of me, so I can't quote it here, but it's one of those things where I've saved the email forever, and I really should print it out and put it in front of my workstation to just remind myself that, like, hey, I wrote a book that Stuart Moore liked, which is
listen, Sarah's pretty good to herself, so there's that.
Yes.
Look, it's only fair. Stuart's written so much that I like.
Yes. It's fantastic. Both Stuart and Tom Pyre being supporters of my work has been fantastic. But the book itself, for the audience who might not know, it's the story of Janie Jones Mercado, who calls herself Strummer, a nickname that was given to her by the Clash-loving father, is a private detective in Los Angeles. Pretty standard noir setup, except that Strummer happens to be a werewolf. She has kind of stepped away when the story started from the supernatural world that she had previously inhabited, and is using her abilities as a werewolf, her enhanced senses and sense of smell, to kind of give her a leg up as a PI working what she calls mundane cases for ordinary humanity. But then the case of a lifetime drops in her lap that kind of pulls her back into that supernatural world. And the case in question is that she's hired by a man named Rainsford Black, the Black of the blacksmith title, to find 30 stolen bullets, which may or may not have been made from Judas's silver. So that becomes the MacGuffin. And then what follows is something akin to the Maltese Falcon, but with monsters in it. And it takes her across the supernatural landscape that exists underground in Los Angeles, and into some sort of a slightly noir conclusion. And then that led into a second volume, which we serialized last year, between 2023, and then which was collected earlier this year in trade.
Those are great covers you got too. Now, I think that's true on everything I've seen you name it, but I really am fond of those covers.
So I want to talk about the covers just for a second, because they're both by the same person.
Yes.
I'm sorry. So this is Liana Kangus's art, and this is Liana Kangus's art later. And I love being able to look at that type of progression. And she's wonderful. I love her. She's a friend, but like, just to be able to see that is just, it's really, really cool. That they did the covers for this.
Who designed the logo?
Liana did. Liana designed the logo, did the covers. Those covers are fantastic. The remit from Sarah to Liana was make these look like pulp novel covers from the 50s and 60s, but also make them like you. So Liana does these fantastic covers that are great and follow that exact set of instructions and have that awesome neon color palette that Liana's so fond of.
She's great with it. They're
yes.
great with it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Robert McGinnis is still alive, and I think he's still working. He was last year, and guys like Max Allan Collins got him to do some comic book covers. Now, Max, of course, is a novelist, a mystery novelist from that great tradition of the 50s and 60s, and the partner of Mickey Spillane's and that sort of thing. The fact that McGinnis is still around and doing those covers, oh my God, that's amazing. That artwork that you're referring to, that's pretty much what got me through my teenage years.
Sure. The logo is a great point too, because it kind of evokes a little bit of yesteryear, which is kind of the world that I think Janie wants to live in more than the world she lives in today. So, one of the things about that you as you were talking about Blacksmith, is that there is this sense of resignation that the lead character has. They're not happy with the world that they're forced to inhabit. They would much rather be inhabit a more mundane world, yet they're called and to have to do it. And it's that sense of responsibility, right, that the character has, as to they could have just walked away and said, I'm not getting involved in this. But it's that's the piece that makes you. It's comics. It's that weird sense of like, the lead character is responsible to humanity. It's what makes good comics because there's that. We're not just Zack Snyder's version of superheroes.
Yeah. Absolutely. I am in love with that character, and I hope, and Ahoy, Hart, Stuart, Tom, if you're listening, let's do some more Blacksmith, because I feel like she needs a send off.
Sure, I agree.
I think the second volume is very much her Empire Strikes Back, in so much as I leave her on quite a down note. I don't want to spoil too much. I really feel like the second volume on its own is, you can read it on its own, but I think it's very much an enriching experience if you've read the first volume. And I don't want to spoil too much, but definitely like I want to give her, if not a happy ending, at least an ending. And so I really hope that I get to revisit these characters as well.
Well, don't forget that that both Ian Fleming and I'm blocking. Jesus, don't get old. Your memory goes wacky. Conan Doyle both killed off their main characters and had to bring them back.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, like I said, I love these books. I have sung their praises to the folks at Ahoy several times, so we're excited.
You're quoted on the second volume trade paperback.
I am. I don't even think I knew that. That's awesome. I have to check that out. See, there's like, I think that's like 4 books on my name is on. It's pretty cool.
So I think it might be attributed to Pop Culture Squad, but
that's
I think
fine.
It was, yeah.
Me.
Yes.
That's cool. Yeah. So yeah, they're great stories, but like I said earlier, talking about the fact that you kind of dwell in these stories that you've been telling that are your stories have been filled with monsters by happenstance. They're not monster stories. They just monsters happen to be characters in the stories. And it's interesting because, everyone has their own, every character has their own monstrous side. Yours just happen to wear them on the outside, You can write that down. It's okay.
I'm going to, thank you.
But go ahead.
No, you first.
No, I want to hear what do you think? Like, how do you? Why do you do that? What calls you to do that?
I think it's because what's interesting to me is writing characters, creating characters, and if I can use these things as kind of a shorthand or a metaphor to get to the heart of the story I want to tell, then that's fantastic. That just lets me get there that much quicker. Someone once told me about, I think everyone who consumes a lot of zombie stories reaches this conclusion on their own eventually, is that zombie stories aren't about like zombies. Nobody cares about zombies, right? Zombies are an antagonist, but they don't have characterization of their own. So the good zombie stories, whether it be something like, the early Romero stories, or The Walking Dead, is that they're about people and they're about how people interact with each other. And zombies in that case are really just another natural disaster. So in the same way, I'm kind of using the supernatural elements, the mythology, things that interest me on the surface, to kind of create metaphor, to kind of create the push pull of characters reacting to each other, whether antagonistically or otherwise, or synergistically, using more corporate speak there. I think that just becomes that useful shorthand in storytelling.
I got zombied out decades ago.
Sure.
For the very reason you mentioned. Not a lot you can do with zombies. There is only one zombie story in comics that I hold on to with that vanished glee. And that was Bill Everett's first zombie story. They later brought the character back as an sort of ongoing character. That is a brilliant story, some of Bill Everett's best work, and it ran like 8 pages. You can tell a zombie story in 8 pages,
Sure.
But you can't warm up to a zombie. By the way, put that on my tombstone.
Can't warm up to a zombie.
Yeah, please.
I'll add that to the list.
Write that down.
His tombstone is going to have to be double-sized at this point.
With staples in the middle.
Yeah. So I will say that there is zombie is a perfect example. It is the monster that is mostly just a prop, right, for telling another story.
Sure.
There's one zombie story that's in comics that I like. iZombie is where the character is a zombie, but like not really, and like there's actually a function to that. But that's also Peter Milligan and Mike Allred, and you don't always get that. So
right.
I want to highlight just a little bit, like the fact of some of the art that Wendell did in this book. I mean, it's really beautiful. And the one thing about about Blacksmith is that it is black and white. At least the first 2 volumes are. For I don't want to get into the reasons for that, but the fact is that it is, and it works really well. It's not something anybody would expect. But here's again some of those those pages, and just the way that the characterization is in this book is just, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. It's a smart story. It's compelling. So we hope for more.
Yeah, well, thank you.
It's probably my favorite of all of your stuff, although I haven't read it all. And I don't know who else would have published it other than Ahoy and done it right.
I mean, it was ultimately Ahoy's decision to do it in black and white. I had originally pitched it as a color book, and I remember getting that news and being a little bummed, if I'm being honest, at first. And then when I started to think about it, I realized that they had enough faith in the book to put it out in black and white, which is that's a huge leap of faith for a publisher to take.
Absolutely.
And and not for nothing, the most popular independent comic of the last 30 years is a black and white horror book published from a non-Big 2 publisher. So sure. If I'm second to The Walking Dead in terms of black and white horror comics on the shelves, that's not a bad place to be. So
damn good place to be.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah. So
particularly if you want to start your own soda pop flavor.
Right.
We talked around this a lot tonight in where you come from in terms of comics, and I saw you post something the other day talking about how as a younger person you were you fanboyed out over things, and you thought you loved comics. What were some of the comics that you grew up that made you say that really attracted you to the medium?
So my good friend in grade school and junior high school, he had inherited, or I guess inherited's the wrong word. He was given his older cousin's comic collection when his cousin grew out of books. And he had, it wasn't a huge collection, but it was 2 or 3 long boxes worth of books. And he got them all at once. And he would invite me over, and we would sit there and we would go through them, and we would read them. And we, at that time, had no idea about collectability and value. And we read that Frank Miller, Chris Claremont Wolverine miniseries, the Armor Wars saga from David McElhaney and Bob Layton is another one that was just seminal for me. The mid 200s Claremont stuff when Silvestri and then Jim Lee took over as on art. And then what we would do is we would read these things, and then we would take them to the local comic shop, and we would allow them to basically lowball us in terms of trade credit for,
so you could buy new comics.
So we could buy new comics.
Nice.
And I came in, I started reading.
Right, that guy is still talking about you to this day.
Yes, that sucker. I came in early 90s, 91, 92. So I was very much a fanboy of the artists that would then go on to found Image. And I would read all of those Image books. And I still have a lot of affection for them, even though I recognize as a storyteller now that there's a lot of warts on those stories. Although it's funny, you had Jerry Ordway on Tuesday?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Wildstar was maybe the very first thought-provoking Image book that I read, the one that actually seemed to have a lot of storytelling heft to it, rather than just being these artists and writers going through the motions of what they were doing when they were working with other writers at Marvel and DC. So that's an early one that I recall and have a lot.
It's one of my Wildstar is one of my favorite 90s Image stuff, and it's later 90s. I think it's 96, 97, something like that.
It must have been right on the edge of when I gave up on comics in favor of. I had a brief period where I discovered, girls, and
everybody does that.
Right. So I stopped reading.
People go to college and they can't afford them. There's those things.
Yes, and then I came back to comics. 2021, 22. Discovering the things that most people discover when they're in their 20s: Sandman, Alan Moore. At that time, it was early days of the Warren Ellis led Wildstorm reboot. So I discovered The Authority and Planetary, and then wandered into my local comic shop. And while I was there, the proprietor of the LCS was talking about Harlan Ellison, who I, at the time, as I mentioned at the top of the show, was obsessed with. And I realized that, okay, that guy and I are going to become best friends. And that more or less happened. So, and then he would just feed me the good stuff that I had missed in my, as a reader, stuff from the 80s and earlier that I had missed, stuff that was coming out that I wasn't privy to. Stuff like, Eric Powell's The Goon, which again was early days. So yeah, that's more or less my journey through comics.
And you, good.
Did you develop a thing for Harlan's work because you're both Ohio boys?
I think that was a coincidence. But it's the same as, I was from Toledo, where nothing ever happens, whereas Harlan was from Painesville, which is spitting distance from Cleveland, where Siegel and Schuster are from, and then that's where the modern guys like Azzarello and Brian K. Vaughan and Bendis are from, and Harvey Picar. So like I was just born on the wrong side of the state, as far as I can tell.
Did you ever get a chance to hang out with Harlan?
I met Harlan twice. He yelled at me both times.
Yes,
but, but you know, I treasure that as much as I would have any other encounter that I would have had with Harlan. So
I was on Harlan's shit list for 3 years. We'd been friends before and friends after, and he had heard something that he thought I had said. The source was good, but the source was wrong, just mistaken. And after like 3 years, I'm enjoying the hell out of being on his shit list. It's really fun. It was almost as much fun as being his friend. I mean, being his friend meant that he would call me up and do a 20 minutes of an imitation of Brother Theodore. And you're going to have to Google Brother Theodore and have some time, because this was an intensely bizarre man being imitated by an intensely bizarre man. So I treasure the moments I've had with Harlan, even when I was on his other side.
Yeah, I had read a short story of his where he talked about, in the introduction, loving chocolate Necco wafers.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to a signing, and I thought, because I was, 21, 22 and naive, and thought that I was the only person who'd ever had this idea, I took him a roll of chocolate Necco wafers. And he basically excoriated me, saying that he had a whole room full of effing chocolate Necco wafers and didn't want mine.
The funny thing is, they make them now near where you grew up. That's where they moved after the Necco factory in near Boston went out of business.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
It was fair.
Really trivial.
Yeah, it was. And then the second time, I had an art book, and it was Visions of Arzach, and it's a collection of other artists interpreting Mobius's Arzak or Arzach. I'm not sure how the pronunciation, because I've only ever read it. And Harlan had written the introduction, and I handed it to him to sign, because at the time I was collecting signatures of all the individual artists that I could find at conventions and things. And he could not recollect having written the introduction. So there was a good couple of minutes where he was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I did write this." And then he signed it and shook my hand, and it was a very sweet moment. And that was towards the end of his active life as a touring lecturer. Yes. So, but yeah, I'm very grateful to have had those two interactions.
He was an incredible guy. And I don't necessarily say that in a good sense. Harlan was Harlan. And there's a lot of great stuff there, and a lot of bad stuff, and a lot of terrific writing, which makes everything else irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. The fact that I personally liked him, that's great, but that's value added.
Yeah, I mean, all of my influences up until a couple of years ago were problematic white men, so it's definitely like and he's just another person on the list. So
yeah, I'm glad that's changing, though. You're helping with that. You helped with that. Some of the creators that you helped to chaperone, and when you were doing anthologies, some of those people have come on to have careers now that are not, don't look like you or I.
Yes, and and that's important to me. I always want to make sure that I also as much as it can be my place, I also want to make sure that not only are the people I collaborate with not all people who look like me, but also that the characters aren't all people who look like me. I mean, I've grown up reading, comics about average looking white dudes, from Peter Parker to Bruce Wayne to Clark Kent to Steve Rogers. That's fine, and they're not going anywhere. So, Strummer Mercado in Blacksmith is a black woman, and her partner is a Middle Eastern
genie
man. He's a jinn. Yeah, he's a genie. Other things that I've worked on, I enjoy, and I realize that writing characters that don't look like me and who are not like me means that I'm going to make mistakes, but I appreciate the opportunity to learn and have people correct me when I'm not 100% on my game.
I'm sure I know the answer to this, but when you're developing a character that is outside of your experience, writing a different type of experience, how do you do research there? What types of things do you do?
I try to talk to people. I have people read the work if I can. I also try to favor the experiences that are universal. Like, I am never going to experience life as a black person, as a woman, as a member of the LGBT community.
Right.
But I realize that the experiences that everyone has, there's a certain universality. I've had my heart broken. I've failed at things. I've succeeded at things. And those are universal experiences. So that's where I'm going to go. I can't and would never write about the experience about being a black woman in the United States. But I do know what it's like to struggle to make ends meet. I do know what it's like to have a hard time paying bills. I do know what it's like to take a job you don't want to take because those bills are piling up. So I think that's the important distinction to make there. I can write stories featuring characters of different experiences, but I can't write about those experiences, and I would never presume to.
I grew up in a city that was unintentionally at first segregated. And instead of seeing it as a city of neighborhoods that were each unique unto themselves, I saw it as a smorgasbord. And I got involved. I mean, the L system was great, so I could go anywhere. And they all had drugstores, so I could always buy comic books in places I never did before. As a kid, it was great. And I experienced little bits and pieces of culture that I wouldn't have if I just sort of stayed in my own place. Now, nobody pushed me to do that. I probably did it because, I'm weird. In the 1950s, that was considered weird. 1960s, that was considered weird. But I think I'm a much better person for it. I don't claim to have any insight into other people's situations. And that's true for other white males as well, just not as true. It's a great learning experience if you get it at the right age, and I think as storytellers, we have a mission to be inclusive, to represent Earth.
I agree. There was one section that one piece that I'm very proud of is towards the end of the second volume of Blacksmith. There's a scene where Ben, who is Strummer's partner, who is a jinn and is a practicing Muslim, has a discussion about his relationship with magic, which is obviously something that is more real and tangible in this world of the story than it is in the world of the reader. And that was one that I did a lot of research, and I was very careful to try and talk about that in a way that was accurate and authentic to the character. But again, that's the character's experience, not my experience.
That's right. That's right. Even though you created the character, you don't create everybody to be you.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, no one wants to read 20 characters who are all just parroting things that I think, right?
Right. Right. Even you. It gets boring to write.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. Again, I'm so glad that we've done this. I know I've seen some stuff that you're working on. Is there any movement on anything that you can talk about?
So the next thing that I can talk about right now is that I am a participant in an anthology by created by a couple of gentlemen from Chicago, Chuck Satterley and Jason Mahalski. They're putting together a really cool anthology called Pots and Panels. It is a collection of short stories that in some way are related to food. And it's going to be a huge, he's got 50 stories in the book. Ron Mars is taking part in it, Stephen Grant, Phil Hester. There's just a ton of awesome names in this book. And I'm very excited. I have an 8-page sci-fi story that posits what food delivery, what gig-based food deliveries like Uber will look like in a cyberpunk future. I just signed off on the line work from a collaborator I'm working with for the first time named Vince Underwood today. It is really exciting. The art's fantastic. I'm pretty excited to share it as soon as I can. I think that will mostly be done through the @Pots and Panels Twitter account that Chuck and Jason have set up. So that's the next thing I can announce.
That's awesome. That's great.
I cannot tell you how appropriate it is to me that you have the Chicago publisher doing an anthology about food, because that's what Chicago's all about.
Yes.
And if you don't know that firsthand, go watch Stephen Colbert's show from last week when he was live in Chicago, and or go to Chicago in 2 weeks when I'll be there, and go to any Italian beef stand, because eventually I'll get there.
Hit everyone. You'll hit everyone, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm a Chicago deep dish apologist. So although I do think that Detroit style pizza is the superior pizza, but I feel like it's the perfect midpoint between the East Coast and the Chicago pizza styles.
Yeah. When I
here's a piece of trivia for you. Thin and sort of medium, like the stuffed pizza stuff, actually outsells thick crust pizza in Chicago to Chicagoans.
I believe it. I believe that the Chicago style pizza is, I think, probably mostly consumed by tourists at this point.
Well, or people who are really, really hungry and don't realize that they're going to get filled up immediately.
I mean, I participate in that whenever I go for C2E2. First night is go to Pizzeria Due, whatever it is, which is
Due. Is Due still open?
That's great. It was.
Oh, that's great.
Yep, that's where Zoller and I usually end up the first night. So.
Sorry, I can go into.
I understand. We've entered Chicago food territory. We can go on forever. But anyway, you know, I think I'm really glad you've done this. I hope that people will check out some of these books, and I hope you'll have you on, you know, when there is something that we can really hype, and then you won't be able to pay attention. You can do the hype show, which will be great.
I think this has been fantastic. I got to kind of do some deep dives with you guys about, you know, continuity and storytelling, and this was actually really refreshing. It's kind of the equivalent, you know, to sort of circle back to the things that Mike was talking about before I joined up, is primarily being behind the table at conventions. I sort of miss the ability to walk around and just enjoy comics conventions as a fan anymore. And in the same way, being a creator who is constantly on the podcast circuit to promote my upcoming work, it's nice to just come and chat about comics writ large. So I thank you for that. This has been really refreshing and something I needed today. So
well, good. We're here. We're here to please.
I'm glad you could help, because you really made this a wonderful conversation about the medium that we all love. And I assume that people who have been watching us for an hour and 45 minutes, hell, you must be loving the medium.
Yeah.
There's TV on.
Yeah.
Well,
we're gonna kind of wrap it up, but thank you everybody for watching. Make sure that you have subscribed to this channel wherever you're watching it, so that you can find out when we go live next. Stay tuned. We're not 100% sure on a Tuesday this show this week. We'll definitely be off on the 10th. We will definitely be back on the week after that. So please stay tuned to us.
Eric, thank you very much for making the time to.
Thank you. This was great. I'm sorry it's taken me, Bob. I'm sorry it's taken me so.
No, it's been worth it. It's been a great show. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to us getting together in person sometime soon. Are you coming to New York?
I will be there. I will be. Just got my table assignment, D14 in Artist Alley.
Awesome.
So,
I'll see you there.
I will be down there.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
We're not sure about next Tuesday, huh?
We're not 100% sure. I think we'll be able to pull it off, but please stay tuned. I'll let everybody know. They know how to get in touch. I know how to get in touch with everybody to be here. And everybody have a great weekend, a great Memorial Labor Day, which is coming up. So, you know, like you don't have, it's a normal Monday to you, but some people have the day off.
I don't even know what day of the week it is.
I understand that. That's fine.
That's for freelancers, and I love being a freelancer, so I don't know what day it is.
Well, hopefully we'll be back on Tuesday. I will let you guys know soon. Please stay tuned to all of our socials, and you'll find out. Anyway, in the meantime, have a great weekend, and we'll see you later.
Thanks for being here, folks. We appreciate it mightily.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?